Hello, my name's Calvin Draper. I'm 34 years old, single, and currently working as a doctor at Tanova Healthcare Harton in Toma, Tennessee. A quiet small town nestled among green hills and two-lane roads that curl like ribbon over the ridge. Toma isn't as bustling as big cities. We have serene streets lined with old oaks, a diner that closes at 8, and sunsets that go off like someone backstage pulled the red curtain on the sky. I love this place, not just because it's pretty, but because it's where I learned what my life was for and where I lost the person who first showed me how to hold it. This afternoon, sunlight pools on my desk like warm honey. My phone buzzes. A Facebook memory blooms on the screen. Me and my grandmother, Hazel Draper, at the Atlanta airport. Her in a blue cardigan and white sneakers. Me all limbs and bad haircut. Both of us grinning like the day couldn't possibly turn. It did. That photo is a doorway, and on the other side is a room I still don't like to enter. I close my eyes, and the door swings open anyway. I tell myself, I'm not here to blame anybody. Maybe a little, mostly, I'm here to tell the truth about the day. A simple sentence put a fracture through everything I thought I knew about family. I forgot your ticket. Just go home. I grew up in Greenville, South Carolina, a city with steel bones and hot summers. My father, Gordon, was an engineer who believed in lines, property lines, deadline lines, the neat ruler lines of a blueprint. My mother, Janelle, was an accountant who carried numbers around like prayers. We had a good house, a wide TV, matching towels for guests who never stayed over. We had dinners where the loudest thing was the fork against the plate. We had grades on the fridge and a family calendar humming with obligations. We were not poor. We were not warm either. It's not that they didn't love me. They loved me like people love a plant they forget to water because it looks fine. I answered their questions like a report, fine, good. Second in class and learned early that feelings take up space, and space is a resource you save. But every June, I got to go to the one place nobody counted the ounces of my joy. My grandmother's house in Toma, Hazel, had been a nurse. The night shift kind. The kind who remembers your dog's name and the way you like your soup. She raised my father and his sister Paula on the smell of coffee and the power of, we'll get through this. Her porch wore flowers in tin buckets, marigolds, geraniums, something purple that always surprised us by living through the first cold snap. The floorboards inside knew every footstep. The house smelled like vanilla, lemon oil, and the faint, clean sting of antiseptic that never quite left her. Cal, she'd say, pressing my face between her hands even when I was taller. You're growing so fast, I should charge admission. Then she'd laugh, because she had that laugh that made strangers turn around and smile at nothing. Those summers were stitched with small, perfect things. Standing on a chair to stir cookie dough while she told me about the time a patient tried to bribe her with a bag of peaches. The library's cool air and the librarian who saved paperbacks for us. Sundays at the river with paper boats. Nights on the porch with fireflies rising and her voice breaking stories into pieces I could pocket. Once, I caught her by the window, fingers ghosting the frame of a photo. My father, Aunt Paula, and me. She didn't badmouth her children. She didn't need to. Love, when it doesn't get returned to sender, turns into a quiet that fills the room anyway. After college, my father moved to Greenville and married my mother and built a life you could measure. Aunt Paula married Leon Mallister, real estate sharp, a man who shook hands like his signature. They moved to Peachtree City with golf carts humming and cul-de-sacs named after trees the developer had ripped out. They had 2 kids, Isabel and James, took piano lessons and smiled with pressed lips in school photos. When I was 18, my grandmother turned 70 in August. She called me in late spring, the ice still clinking in her glass. Calvin, she said, and I could hear the thrill in the way she held my name. I have a wild idea. I want to stand at an ocean I've never seen with the people I love and feel very small in a good way. I want to take us all to Hawaii. One big, ridiculous trip she'd been saving for years. Not for a roof, not for a new car, for a feeling. $30,000, scraped and folded and tucked into certificates and accounts the bank teller knew by her first name. Flights, hotel, the show where they spin fire, she said. All of it. Say yes, so I can start writing lists. My father hated it. He didn't say so at first, but you could see it in the way his mouth set. Frivolous, he said. Risky. He offered to handle the logistics so she wouldn't get taken for a ride. She agreed, happy to let someone else hold the clipboard, and transferred funds to him. She kept a pink notebook with tabs for everyone's middle names and shoe sizes. If love could be measured in ink, that notebook would have been a wedding ring. June slid into July and emails flew. Aunt Paula sent links to poke bowls. My mother sent thumbs-up emojis. I studied the itinerary like scripture. We would fly out of Atlanta, direct to Honolulu. We'd get there in time for sunset, the night before. I packed my life into a suitcase that still smelled like my last sleepover at Hazel's, sunscreen and sugar. In the next room, my parents argued in muffled tones. I caught pieces. I'm not going to be made a fool of. He's 18. She'll make it about them. My mother's voice tried to wrap around his like a bandage that wouldn't stick. We were on the road before dawn. The highway was a black belt, the car a bead sliding down it. I watched the world pink at the edges and imagined ocean for the first time, not on a calendar. The airport did its airport think people late for things they couldn't afford to miss. Couples speaking in corners like they were already jet-lagged. We met by the big fountain. Hugs. Nice to see you. Oh my gosh, Isabel, you're so tall. Then Hazel's small, bright cardigan, sneakers, eyes like 1,000 birthdays. She saw me, and I saw the little girl she must still feel like sometimes. And we both laughed. A stranger offered to take a group photo. We bunched up duffels at our feet. If you didn't know better, you'd think that picture held a family at takeoff. Check dash-in is the kind of place my father thrives. He held a white envelope, called it the packet, and moved like he had invisible epaulets. He assigned everybody tasks. I watched the board flip letters and felt 16 birds in my chest. He came back from the counter and crooked a finger at me. We stepped to a column where the crowd split around us. He didn't look at me. Listen, he said. His voice had that frost line in it. I forgot your ticket. It must be at the house. Airports are loud, but sometimes they go silent around one sentence. I blinked. There's no ticket to forget. It's all the tickets. They can't find your reservation, he said. I don't have the confirmation. We don't have time to stand here. Go home. I'll fix it. I'll book you for tomorrow. I'll talk to Grandma, I said, and stepped past him. He stepped with me, close enough that I could smell the clean iron scent of his aftershave. Don't you dare, he said, soft and hard. She's already nervous. Don't make a scene. Over his shoulder, I saw Paula leading Hazel toward TSA. Isabel pulling a suitcase like it was a pet, James craning to see a pilot. My grandmother looked back, saw me, lifted her hand, and gave me the smile that had softened every bad day I'd ever had. I waved like a child from a classroom window. She turned, trusting the plan. I'll ask the agent, I said. I did. The agent, kind, tired eyes typed my name. She frowned. I'm not seeing you on this reservation, she said. Do you have any confirmation number? My father booked it, I said. We're all traveling together. I wish I could help, she said, and I could tell she meant it. We don't have you on the manifest for today or tomorrow. Maybe you're on a separate record. I thanked her. I stood there while people were called by name to board an adventure that had my grandmother's handwriting on it. My father appeared like a shadow. Go, he said, pushing a 20 into my pocket like it was a kindness. Marta, Greyhound, I'll call you. I watched their group move toward security. He was right. There was no time now. That's the thing about logistics. When you put them between people, they become the boss. On the train, kids sang to a stuffed tiger. A woman chose a face cream in a tiny mirror. I stared at my stupid reflection on adult who felt very much like a kid until the city swallowed the train and emptied it out again. In the bus station, I sat with my backpack like a remora, clinging to a shark. My phone rang. Sweetheart, she said, and her voice was soft the way paper is soft after it's been wet. We'll fix it tomorrow. Does Grandma know? I asked. She's boarding, she said. I'll call you later. I rode the bus back to Greenville with the shell of the day rattling around me. Home was exactly where I had left it, which felt like an insult. I set the suitcase in my room without opening it. I stared at the ceiling. I counted breath like they teach you to calm an irregular heart. At 10, my phone lit up. Calvin, my grandmother's voice can cross oceans without losing itself. Honey, are you home? I am. Are you okay? I thought about lying. I wanted to be there, I said, and my throat tightened. He told me you were sick, she said, and I could hear the way the words didn't fit. He said you wanted to fly tomorrow. I called the airline, a short breath. There's no ticket for you. I know, I said, whispering. I could make it less true if I lowered the volume. Okay, she said. I could feel her spine all the way through the line. I'm going to handle this. I will talk to him. And then when I get back, you and I are going to stand in the ocean somewhere. I don't care if it's the one that comes with riptides and seaweed. We'll do it our way. Don't come back early, I said. Please, see the thing you saved for. I will, she said. And I'll tell you everything. I'll bring you the ocean in my pocket. She did what she said. She called him. There are some arguments that break a room just by being spoken. I wasn't in that one, but later I heard the shape of it. My father, all reasons and clerical errors. My grandmother, all questions asked slowly enough that there was nowhere for answers to hide. You didn't buy him a ticket? Why? He said the quiet part out loud to her. I wasn't going to watch you make it about him. He said the part that had more to it than he wanted to admit. There were cash flow issues. There were upgrades. There were a million small, selfish choices that added up like interest you pretend not to understand. I slept a little and woke up to the light in the hall being wrong. I made tea and didn't drink it. I walked the neighborhood in circles until the day broke all the way open, when they landed in Honolulu. My grandmother called me from a balcony. I could hear the ocean trying to explain itself. It's blue in a way my eyes feel new, she said. I'm going to eat a pineapple like it owes me money. Promise me you'll laugh, I said. Out loud, baby, she said. We're going to make the neighbors complain. I didn't see her for 10 days. I saw her pictures, the ones where she stood in front of cliffs the color of old pennies. The ones where a flower sat behind her ear like it had been waiting. There was a picture of the whole group. My father, handsome, closed. My mother, careful, trying. Aunt Paul, who half smile, half don't start with me. A space between my grandmother and the railing that anybody else would miss. I knew that was my spot. I felt it in my knees. She came home with a little cloth bag and a sunburn she tried to hide. We sat at her kitchen table, the light slanting in. She tipped out sand that felt like talc, sea glass worn to kindness, a shell that sang if you pressed it to your ear and pretended to be 6. She put her hand on top of mine, warm, small, steady. I'm so mad at him I could set something on fire, she said. But I'm not going to burn your life to make my point. What are you going to do? I asked. Make soup, she said, and laughed. But I could see the steel in the joke. And call a lawyer. The next Saturday. We all sat at the table that had fed generations. Coffee, a plate of cookies. Made with too much butter, her way of bribing the day. My father in a crisp polo that had opinions. My mother with her hands folded like a student. Aunt Paula, arms crossed, earrings swinging. Leon, quiet, good eyes. The kids in the other room with cartoons turned down. The air had that strange feeling rooms get when truth is about to come in. My grandmother began with no lace. You left my grandson at the airport, she said. You used my money for things I did not ask you to use it for. You told me a story that wasn't true so you could stand inside the part of the picture you liked. My father took a long, elegant breath. He met her eyes with all the arguments ready. I made a decision, he said. He is 18. He can fly on his own. There were costs you didn't consider. I managed the trip so it wouldn't be a fiasco, funny, Aunt Paula said. It still was. There were upgrades, Leon said, not unkindly. In a Suburban that wasn't strictly necessary. In payroll, which is a different conversation, my father's jaw went hard. You're all very brave when the bills aren't in your name. I put my name on $30,000. My grandmother said, soft as bread. And on the boy you turned around at a gate, this is me, being brave. She put a thin envelope in the middle of the table and looked at me like I was an anchor. I changed my will, she said. The house goes to Calvin. This isn't punishment. It's observation. He lives here when he can. He mows the lawn without being asked. He holds things with two hands. Gordon, you will always be my son. I am done letting you be my manager. He laughed a sharp, empty sound. Then we're finished here, he said, stood, and left the house without taking a cookie. He didn't slam the door. It would have been almost easier if he had. We were not finished. We were never going to be, not in the neat way anyone prefers. But something had been named, and names have power. After. Aunt Paula went to the living room and sat between her kids like a general putting herself where the arrows would fly first. My mother stayed at the table and stared at the butter knife like it might have advice. My grandmother poured herself more coffee, added too much cream, and put another cookie on my plate like her entire plan for the future fit under the umbrella of feed the people you love. We did not go to Hawaii together. A week later, she and I put towels and a cooler into the back of her dusty sedan and drove to Tybee Island. It was the kind of late summer day that lets you know the year is tilting. We stayed in a motel with a humming window unit and curtains that tried to be cheerful. The Atlantic was green and honest and pulled at our ankles like a toddler determined to show you something. We ate gas station sandwiches on a towel and she said, "Close your eyes," and then she flicked water at my face, and we both laughed like kids who had won the day. On the way home, she told me things you only tell when you're driving and the road is a line and the sun is sliding down. She told me she loved my father and that he was a good boy who learned the wrong lesson. She told me she should have left my grandfather sooner and that sometimes staying is a form of pride too. She told me she was tired, and then she told me to pull over at a stand for peaches, and we bought too many, and she ate one leaning on the hood. Juice on her wrist, happy. I went to college. I studied. I came back here to work at the hospital, a building that smells like lemon cleaner and bravery. I called her on Sundays. I came over Wednesdays too, because a week is a long time to go without hearing the person who remembers your first lost tooth laugh at your bad jokes. My father and I built a truce out of practicalities. My mother found a part-time job at a flower shop and came home with hands that smelled like rain. The end didn't come in a snap. It arrived like fog. A little swelling. A little breathlessness. Appointments that pile up on the calendar like a new kind of holiday. She never gave me fear to carry. "Kiddo," she said. As I adjusted her pillow, I have outlived some of the people who were supposed to outlive me. Everything after 70 is a borrowed library book. I'm just hoping the fines aren't too steep. A week before she died, she gave me an envelope. After, she said, "Don't fuss." I did. I fussed with her blankets and her glass and the angle of the blinds and the way the world dared to keep spinning. I was beside her when she went, hand in hand, learning the truth every nurse learns first. The warmth leaves slowly. The world is quieter for a second. And then the birds have the nerve to keep singing. In the envelope was the thing she'd told us it. The table formalized in stamped paper. And a note in her pink pen. "I want you to put your feet up on this porch and know it is yours. Not because of what your father did. Because home should belong to the person who knows where the light switch is in the dark. There's more, of course. There's my father's stroke and the apology that was more water than speech. There's the way Aunt Paula never let the story get buried under nice napkins. There's Isabel calling me from her dorm room to ask how long to boil spaghetti. There's the sea glass I still keep in my wallet. But if I keep talking, this afternoon we'll let go of the light. The winter my father's right hand forgot how to be his was the same. Winter, the hospital courtyard camellia surprised us all with pink. He was at his office in Greenville. Reaching up for a file he kept too high because control feels taller when you store it on a shelf. The headache he'd been calling annoying for a week tightened into a knot. His arms stuttered. Words, those good, competent words he lived inside, slid out of order. He sat down on the carpet and told himself a story about fatigue. A secretary found him 15 minutes later. confusion blooming on his face like an ink spill. My mother called me from the parking lot, breath fogging in the cold. "They say it's small," she said. "They say he's lucky." Lucky is a word people use when they don't know how to say the opposite. By the time I got there, they'd stabilize him. The scan showed a little white flower in his left hemisphere. The neurologist used phrases that try their best: ischemic, thrombotic, mild deficitant. Promised therapy would teach the body a detour. My father looked like a man who'd been forced to sit in a chair he didn't pick. His mouth on the right side lagged a beat. When he tried to pick up the pen they left on his tray table, it skittered away like a bug. I washed my hands and sat. He stared at his hand like it had betrayed him. "I can't make it hold," he said, a frown assembling itself without his permission. We started small. A thick, triangle grip pen from the therapist's kit. Letters printed in boxes. The first C was a broken fence. The A fell over on its way up the hill. He cursed under his breath, then apologized to no one. I watched him do the thing that scared him most. Be bad at something in front of someone who loved him, the therapist as Cortez. 5'0", and the patience of a planet showed him how to brace his forearm, how to breathe before he tried. She didn't say "good job" because she knew he'd reject that. She said, "There, that's closer." And he nodded like he'd accept that kind of truth. When she left us alone, he looked at me with an expression I had not seen since I was 10, and he'd found me on the back steps with my knee split open. Stubborn and scared. He said I wasn't ready to be this version of myself. "No one is," I said. He practiced daily. The page filled with shipwrecks of letters. The first time he wrote my name in a line that didn't tilt into the ditch. He held it up like a report card he couldn't decide to be proud of. Cal the Vin wobbled and ran together. It was ugly and perfect. He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding since Atlanta, since long before. "I never apologized, right?" he said suddenly. Like a man tripping over a truth hidden in the rug. "You still can," I said. He nodded and put the pen down carefully. As if the act of rest could be learned too. My mother brought him a sweater she thought made him look like a college professor. She set it on the chair and smoothed it twice. When I walked her to the parking lot, she held my arm like she was practicing for being someone else. "In the glow of the sodium lights," she said. The neurologist asked him to write a sentence. In his sentence he wrote, "I'm trying." It looked like a child wrote it. I thought, well, that's not wrong. In rehab, he refused group therapy for the first week. He didn't want to lift weights in front of men who looked at their hands the way he was starting to. Miss Cortez caught him dodging a session and cornered him like a small bird who knows exactly when to peck. "Mr. Draper," she said, "this room is full of men who could build you a bridge out of what they've learned." He didn't like being told something that clean. He went the next day and came back quieter in a better way. One afternoon, I brought a notebook and a book of crossword puzzles. We did the Monday one together, slowly. He wanted to skip clues he should have known. I wouldn't let him. He got one for a apology multiplier. "Sorries," he muttered, and then had the grace to wince at himself. He sat back. "Your grandmother wrote me a letter," he said. "I've read it a dozen times. It says things like the truth is a fence that keeps out people who brought you water." He swallowed. "She was never sentimental when it mattered. She was sentimental about cinnamon rolls," I said. He smiled. Crooked now, but more honest. "She'd be furious that I'm learning to write again," he said, and he meant proud. When he went home, my mother stuck Post-its around the house with little practice tasks. Open jars, button shirt, tie shoe. On the fridge, in her careful accountant script, she put a Post-it that simply said, "Ask." He laughed when he saw it, then left it there. He called me on a Tuesday to ask how long to microwave leftovers without turning them to leather. He called me on a Friday to ask which hand exercises were worth the ache. He called me on a Sunday and didn't ask anything. He said I'm making soup, as if that were a confession. In spring, he came to Toma on a day the sky couldn't stop being blue. He stood in Grandma's backyard and looked at the marigolds like he was checking the gauges on a delicate machine. "You kept them," he said. "They kept me," I said, which was not something I would have told him a year before. He nodded like that, made a strange kind of engineering sense. He took his pen, the thick one, and wrote Hazel in the corner of a seed packet I handed him. The Z fought him. He didn't fight back. He did not become a different man. He became this one, which was different enough maybe to count as a new design. His apologies came not like fireworks, but like weather. One day while tying his shoe, he said, "I did it on purpose, you know." And I said, "I know." And he said, "I don't know why that doesn't end the conversation." And I said, "Because we don't live inside the worst thing we did unless we decide to." Summer came on slow and thick. And with it, my mother in a rental Corolla with a plant in the passenger seat. She came to Toma alone for the first time in forever, a suitcase in the trunk, her mouth set in a line that had room at the corners for new things. She pulled into my driveway and cut the engine and sat for a full minute before getting out. Taking the plant with her like a talisman, it was a fiddled leaf fig with delusions of grandeur. She had no business keeping it alive. That was the point. I met her at the porch steps. She looked up at the eaves and the old wind chime that only rings when it means it. "This house feels like a memory I borrowed," she said. And her eyes went to the swing, where my grandmother used to sit with her pink notebook and her pen. We made iced tea. We took our shoes off. We sat until the cicadas rose around us like applause from the trees. Her shoulders slid down from her ears an inch at a time. Traffic in town was thin and steady. Every pickup sounded like somebody we knew. She held the plant in her lap and said, "I'm sorry." I said, "For what?" "Because I wanted to hear the shape of it. Not because I needed her to bleed." "For letting your father's weather decide my wardrobe," she said, and we both smiled at the weird accuracy of it. "For the airport? For calling your hurt a misunderstanding in my head because I didn't know how to hold both the truth and my marriage. Without breaking something, we watched a moth throw itself at the porch light. Despite the darkness offering it everything. "It's okay," I said. And I meant not that it was okay then, but that it could be okay now. She nodded. She reached for my hand like she used to when crossing streets with me and squeezed twice. Our old code from when I was small and brave. We didn't plan a grand finale. Life rarely gives you one. It gives you a string of decent days and lets you braid them into something that can hold a little weight. But the year moved, and I kept feeling this tug like a sleeve being pinched by a small, insistent hand. It was Hazel's voice in the background, not asking for loyalty, just reminding me of a list she hadn't finished. I found the pink notebook while I was hunting a screwdriver in a drawer that should have held only twist ties and rubber bands. It was at the bottom, under a stack of takeout menus she never ordered from. The last pages were her handwriting slanting toward the right. Doesn't matter which. Salt is salt. Light is light. Under that, in smaller letters, if you can manage the big one, do it. Even if we do it wrong, we'll do it together. I took the notebook to the hospital cafeteria and read it with my coffee like a catechism. That afternoon, I emailed the hospital foundation and asked how much paperwork it took to make a small scholarship happen. They wrote back with enthusiasm and forms. The Hazel Draper Night Nurse Fund began inside a manila folder with a paperclip and grew a spine the day 3 of Usme. It's Cortez from rehab. And a charge nurse named Erin stood in a break room and told the night shift we'd cover one certification course a year for anybody who needed it. We put a photo of Hazel by the coffee maker, her cardigan bright, her smile the kind you carry like a lighter. People slipped dollar bills into a jar with her name on it. Leon mailed a check big enough to make the accountant whistle. Aunt Paula cried when I texted her a picture. My father sent an envelope with his careful new writing on the front and no return address. Inside, a contribution and a note with 2 words, for Hazel. The ceremony was small on purpose. The day we gave the first award, we set up folding chairs in the multi-purpose room and brewed coffee that could strip paint. Erin said a few things about the way night nurses knit a hospital together while everybody else pretends sleep is a plan. I said a few things about a woman who held other people's pain without letting go of their joy, Ms. Cortez. Handed the certificate to a nurse named Sherry Hood. Been saving tips from waitressing her second job for a certification fee that was always one bill out of reach. She hugged the paper to her chest like it was a life preserver in the back row. My mother sat in a blouse the color of cloud shadow and held a tissue she didn't use. Beside her, in a sweater he'd ironed himself, my father kept his hands flat on his knees, as if steadying something invisible. While people ate brownies from a supermarket tray, he walked up to the photo of Hazel and touched the corner of the frame like he was greeting a veteran. He didn't make a speech to me. He didn't need to. He said quietly, "You did something she would have thought practical." It was the best compliment he could give. That weekend, he came early to my house. The porch rail had been wobbling for months, the kind of thing that makes a handyman feel accused every time he looks at it. He opened the trunk of his car and took out a toolbox that smelled like oil and an old man's garage. And he stood at the bottom of the steps looking up like an engineer faced with weather. I held the ladder while he worked. He measured twice, cut once, and then cut one more time, because sometimes even measuring gives you lies. The sun shifted. We shifted with it. There was a silence that might have been awkward once, but now felt like two people finally sharing the same room, without worrying who was supposed to leave. He tightened the last bolt. He climbed down. I put my weight on the rail. It didn't move. He wiped his hands on a rag and said, "If I had held you like that, maybe it would have gone different." I didn't know what to say to that kind of truth. So I did what Hazel would have loved. I went inside and sliced 2 thick pieces of cold watermelon, brought them out on a plate, and we ate them on the steps, spitting seeds into the yard like boys. He looked at me sideways and said, "I drove to Atlanta last week. I sat in the parking garage 2 hours and never went inside." I said, "That counts." And he nodded, relieved in a way you wouldn't notice unless you used to look at him for permission too. Breathed, the idea of the big ocean didn't let go. The pink notebook sat on my mantle, a magnet for plans. In late winter, I sent a group text to my mother and Aunt Paula. "What do you think about Hawaii in May?" I expected a flurry of reasons why May was not a month, or why the Pacific was a bridge too far. Instead, Aunt Paula replied with 3 dancing lady emojis, and finally, my mother sent a stream of dots like she was thinking in Morse code, and then I have a swimsuit I've never worn. I called my father. I didn't frame it as an invitation he could refuse without denting the day. I told him what we were doing. I told him exactly when and where. I asked if he'd like to come, and then I told him it was okay if he wasn't ready. He was quiet long enough that I could hear the refrigerator in his kitchen cycle on. He said, "I'll drive you to the airport." And I knew that was his way through a door he wasn't ready to name. We printed the confirmations. We printed them again because habit is a superstition that sometimes works. We drove to Atlanta in 2 cars, so nobody felt trapped by anybody else's version of time. He met us at departures with coffees he'd actually ordered right. He carried my mother's bag as far as the first no you can't sign would allow. At the airline kiosk, when the screen asked for our confirmation numbers, he didn't hover, but he didn't walk away either. When the machine spit out the boarding passes, he took mine between his fingers for a second and then handed it back. He said, "Eyes on the paper." I didn't forget it, and I said, "I know." At security, we hugged in that quick. Stiff way families do when they're deciding not to make a thing. He stepped back. He looked small and big at the same time. "Text me when you land," he said. My mother squeezed his hand the way she squeezes mine before crossing streets. He squeezed back. We moved into the line. When I turned around, he was still there, in the space between sliding doors. Watching like a man who had decided to let something leave without calling it a loss, the flight was the flight. The ocean appeared out the right windows all at once, like a country with no permission required. Honolulu was humid the way a greenhouse is growing everything whether you're ready or not. Aunt Paula collected luggage like she was rescuing old friends off a carousel. Isabel and James groaned in the way time sneaks up on you bickered, and then stopped, and then shared earbuds. Their heads tilted together. My mother, in her wide-brim hat, looked like a woman who had learned a new kind of breathing. We didn't schedule much. We were done with itineraries that don't bend. We went to the beach early when the water is a clear shoulder blade and the sand hasn't been argued with. We watched Aunt Paula decide that age is a rumor and dunk herself in the small surf with a squeal that made strangers smile. We ate shaved ice that stained our tongues and laughed about it like children proving a point. We hiked a little and sat a lot. We looked toward the place where the horizon hides its seam and we let the blue do the work. On the second morning, we drove to Lanakai before the sun blew its first breath. The road narrowed, and the houses yawned, and the sky in the east learned a new color. We carried our sandals and held our cups of gas station coffee like offerings on the sand. Hazel had given me 16 years ago, the pale green triangle polished into softness by time and tide and thumb. She set it in my palm like she was giving me my name again. "Keep it or let it go," she said. "Both are a way to love." I looked at it in the growing light. It had been a window I carried inside a wallet, a way to check the sun when the day was wrong. I thought about Hazel's notebook, about how she believed in saving and spending, and how both were verbs. I walked to the water. It was cold enough to make memory feel like a good idea. Aunt Paula waited beside me, her capri pants already doomed. Isabel and James linked hands with her from the other side. And my mother held the hem of her dress up and stepped into the foam like a ceremony she didn't know. The words too, but recognized anyway. I held the sea glass up for the others to see, the light spilling through it and painting my wrist with a color you can't make on land. I said, "Thank you," and then I tossed it back. Not dramatic. Just enough for the ocean to make it its own again. It sank, and the water moved over it like forgiveness. We stood there while the sun broke open the day. A woman down the beach ran with her dog and waved. We waved back like locals. A man paddled out on a board and didn't fall. The tide tugged at our ankles the way a child does when it's time to go and you're not ready. My mother wiped her eyes and then laughed at herself. Aunt Paula said, "I can't believe we didn't do this sooner." And James said, "We did it now." And Isabel said, "Grandma would say that's exactly on time." We didn't find a luau or a show where people spun fire. The one night at a food truck, we watched a cook turn a grill into a small star and we all cheered. We didn't dress up for dinners. We ate fish that tasted like it had stories. We slept the kind of sleep hotel curtains were invented for. On the last day, we bought a cheap paper fan with hibiscus painted on it. And my mother folded it in and out all afternoon like a heartbeat. At the airport, our flight was delayed. We sat on the floor near a tall window and let the terminal pass us like a parade. Across from us, a teenager in a cap and gown must have been a graduation trip scrolled through photos, smiling every few swipes. A young family built a fort out of carry-ons. An older couple shared a sandwich with the practiced choreography of people who make one thing feel like plenty. I thought about the first time here, about a hotel balcony my grandmother stood on with a phone pressed to her ear and an ocean that tried to comfort her by being bigger than her anger. I took out the pink notebook, the last page with the ocean underlined twice. "Take them to the ocean," she'd written. "Light is light." On the flight home, the hum was a lullaby. We landed in Atlanta, under a sky the color of a well-used pan. At the end of the jetway, my father waited near a pillar like he wasn't waiting, hands in his pockets as if holding marbles. He saw us and his face did that thing I'd been watching for a year, opened. Not wide, but enough to let light in. My mother went to him first. He took her bag. He didn't ask if we had fun, the way people do when they want you to tell the version they can handle. He said, "How was it?" It meant the big thing and the small. She said it was beautiful and wrong and right. And then she laughed because it sounded like too many things, and he said, "That sounds about accurate." We drove back to Toma the next morning. August leaned into the porch like it owned it. The marigolds were outrageous, exactly as Hazel would have scolded them into being. My father stood by the garden and pulled a seed head, rubbed it between forefinger and thumb, and revealed the small, dark dashes inside. He poured them into my hand. "Plant them," he said. We did, that afternoon. On the far edge of the bed, where the soil still remembers someone kneeling. Later that week, my mother set the cheap paper fan beside the photo of Hazel on the mantel. Aunt Paula sent a group text. "Everyone check your mail on Tuesday." On Tuesday, we each got a small padded envelope. Inside, a postcard from the food truck with a grease stain and 4 pressed marigold petals that hadn't survived as petals but survived as color. On the back, in a handwriting I knew by heart, she'd written what I suspected she'd copied out of the pink notebook in her own way. The point was never the place. It was the people. But I'm glad we got the place too. in September. It's first day of fall pretending to be summer. We had a small barbecue in my grandmother's yard. Leon made corn the way he swears his uncle invented, boiled with milk and sugar, then kissed by the grill. My father handled the tongs like delicate instruments, turning things a second before they thought to burn. My mother put the lumpy pottery bowl she had made on the table and filled it with tomatoes that tasted like July had been bottled and opened just for us. Isabel taught my mother a ridiculous dance to a song none of us understood. James lay in the grass and pointed out a plane to anyone who would look up. Near sunset, my father handed me an envelope. Not a legal-sized thing, not a manila folder. Just a white envelope that had the weight of one page and some care. I opened it and found a photograph I hadn't seen. Hazel and me in the Thai Bee Motel parking lot the day we drove back 16 years ago. I'm holding a bag of chips and laughing at something she said. She's got one hand on the car door and one hand in the air like she's directing traffic. On the back, in his new handwriting, he had written, "I've been carrying this around, waiting to feel worthy of giving it. I think I might be ready to try being ready." We ate. The sky did that slow theatrical descent the South is famous for. The first star showed up on schedule. In the quiet after dishes, but before yawns, plain stitched across our piece of sky, a silver dash, a moving comma. In a sentence we were still writing. Nobody flinched. We watched it the way you watch something do exactly what it's meant to. When the night finished folding itself around us, we drifted inside. My mother stood in the doorway and listened. She turned to me and said, "Do you hear it?" I listened. The house breathed. The kettle on the stove clicked as it cooled. The cicadas sent up their electric choir. Somewhere out there, past the hills, a train laid its low horn over the trees like a hand. And up high, so far you had to believe it without proof, a plane hummed. It didn't pull me backward. It didn't dare me to run. It sounded like a promise. There are other rooms, other mornings, other water, other chances. We had taken one. We had made room for more. Before bed, I went out to the porch and sat in the swing with the pink notebook on my lap. I flipped to the very last line, the one I hadn't noticed before under the bend of the cardboard. It was written slantwise, like a secret she'd tucked in for whoever made it to the end. Remember to laugh at the right things. Remember to forgive slow if you need to. Remember to save a seat. I looked at the extra chair we'd left on the porch all summer, the one that made the arrangement a little lopsided. I didn't move it. I liked the way it threw the balance off, the way it held space for whoever might be walking by with a story they hadn't told yet. I turned off the porch light. The night held. Tomorrow, I would round on patience and tell a kid his cast got to come off. And I would call my father to ask if the marigolds had sprouted yet. And I would text Aunt Paula a picture of the ridiculous lumpy bowl now holding lemons. I would go to the airport again someday and watch someone else arrive to someone who waited for them. I would keep hearing that hum in the sky and letting it make me taller, not smaller. I didn't go home when he told me to. I went forward, and the ocean waited, patient as ever, to meet us where we were.